Welcome to the Tim Booker Book Sharing channel. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our updates. Let's explore the world of books together.
Today I will interpret a book for you, which was published in 2023. Its title is How Big Things Get Done. The subtitle is a bit lengthy: The Surprising Factors That Determine the Fate of Every Project, from home renovations to space exploration and everything in between. The primary author of this book is Flyvbjerg, a professor at the University of Oxford and an economist from Denmark. In recent years, his major focus has been on megaprojects with budgets in the billions, such as constructing skyscrapers, building extensive railways, organizing Olympic events, and producing blockbuster films. Over more than a decade, he has built a vast, megaproject database, covering over 20 different fields, 136 countries, and more than 16,000 projects. From this, he has identified key patterns that determine the success or failure of these projects. These patterns can also be applied in the lives and work of ordinary people, such as home renovations, report writing, event planning, and more. In summary, if you want to turn a complex plan into reality and ensure it is completed with quality and on time, the content of this book can be beneficial. Part 1. Iron Law of Megaprojects. Let's start today with a sad story. The protagonist of this story is a world-renowned megaproject, the Sydney Opera House. You've probably seen its iconic design, resembling a cluster of white sails about to set sail in the wind. Each sail looks like a seashell, a cloud, or the wings of a bird, pure, beautiful, and elegant. Even though it has been half a century since its completion, the design still feels timeless. So, who is the genius behind this outstanding architectural design? The designer's name is Bjørn Utzon. The Australian government initiated a design competition for the Sydney Opera House, receiving over 200 proposals from more than 30 countries. Utzon's proposal stood out and amazed the judges because it was exceptionally beautiful. This marks the beginning of the Sydney Opera House story: a genius design, a young designer, and an overnight fame through the competition. It seemed like a dream come true. However, the story did not continue in this idyllic manner. The construction of the Sydney Opera House turned out to be a complete failure. Why? Firstly, it severely exceeded the planned time. The construction was supposed to take 5 years, but it ended up taking 14 years. Moreover, the budget was grossly overspent, with the final construction cost being 14 times the initial budget. Even with all that time and money spent, when it was completed in 1973, only the exterior was finished. There were many defects inside, and it couldn't even host opera performances due to inadequate acoustic conditions. It took several years to rectify these issues. Now, let's pause here for a moment and discuss the reasons behind the failure of this project later. For now, let's use this example to introduce a crucial research finding from the book. That is, the majority of megaprojects, those with budgets exceeding $1 billion, experience similar problems in their construction process as the Sydney Opera House: over budget, over time, and under benefits. The author calls this the iron law of megaprojects. Whether it's architectural projects like museums, concert halls, and skyscrapers, or transportation projects like bridges, tunnels, highways, and railways, or even large-scale events like nuclear power plants, hydroelectric plants, or the Olympics, it's challenging to escape this iron law. In the author's database covering over 16,000 projects, only 0.5% managed to avoid this law. The remaining 99.5% of projects either go over budget, exceed the planned time, or fall short in terms of benefits. Often, it's not just one aspect but a combination of two or even all three. What does this mean? It means that if you are leading a large project, whether it's a significant construction or a large company's IT system, you shouldn't be too optimistic. The harsh reality revealed by big data is that you have a 99.5% chance of not being able to complete the task with quality, on time, and within the budget. Okay, so what if we set up a buffer zone? For instance, if I'm constructing a large building, I set the time and budget, and then add an extra 20% as a safety margin. Wouldn't that work? However, the author tells us that it's far from sufficient. The data shows that the actual cost of a large construction project, on average, exceeds the budget by 62%. Moreover, the probability distribution of this data is not normal, it's a fat-tailed distribution, meaning the likelihood of extreme cases is relatively high. Many well-known large projects belong to this fat tail. For example, the Big Dig project in Boston, replacing an elevated highway with a tunnel, endured 16 years of agony and cost 3 times the initial budget. NASA's James Webb Space Telescope, planned for 12 years, took 19 years to complete and went over the original budget by more than 4 times. There's also the Scottish Parliament building, delayed by 3 years and exceeding the budget by 10 times. We've all heard of the term black swan, referring to low probability, high-impact risk events. In the realm of megaprojects, it's practically a black swan breeding ground, with black swans running rampant everywhere. Why does this happen? The main reason is that every megaproject is a complex system, where each element is interconnected. So, if there's a glitch in one small area, it can cascade like dominoes leading to a disaster. As megaprojects have long durations, it's almost inevitable that some issues will arise along the way, making the dominoes easy to topple. Part 2. Slow thinking, fast action. So, a strategy that can significantly reduce the probability of problems in a project is to try to shorten the construction time. For example, it's like living next to a black swan breeding ground. The longer you keep your windows open, the more likely a black swan is to fly in. So, one solution is to minimize the window opening time. But is this approach too straightforward? We've seen many hastily pushed projects end up as disasters, endless money pits. That's why there's a saying, haste makes waste. Indeed, that's the case. So, is there a method that is both fast and high quality? The recommendation from the author is called Think Slow, Act Fast. In other words, he divides the entire project cycle into 2 stages. The first is the planning or thinking phase, and the second is the action phase. When we mentioned minimizing the window opening time, it refers to making the action phase as short as possible, aiming for quick and decisive execution. However, in the thinking phase, it must be slow, carefully considering all aspects of the matter, testing repeatedly, before proceeding to action. It sounds like an obvious principle, but the author's research reveals that, in reality, large projects often follow the opposite approach. They rush through the thinking phase, eager to start, only to discover various problems after commencement. This leads to delays and results in going over budget, exceeding the planned time, and low efficiency. The earlier example of the Sydney Opera House is a negative illustration of this approach. Going back to the story of the Sydney Opera House, the genius design by architect Utzon turned out to be more of a dream in the sky. When Utzon was drawing, he never considered how this 2-dimensional drawing would translate into a 3-dimensional structure, what internal structure and materials would be used, and how it would be constructed. These were aspects he never considered. The designer didn't consider these, and did the people funding the Opera House project think about them? Unfortunately, they didn't delve into it either. At the time, the key figure behind the Opera House project, the Premier of New South Wales, Cahill, had been in office for many years and was diagnosed with cancer. He wanted to leave behind a political legacy and felt that his implemented public policies weren't enough, there had to be a magnificent building. So, he only glanced at rough cost estimates and decided to start construction quickly, continuously pushing for progress after the start. As construction progressed, problems kept arising. To solve them, they had to keep pouring money in, delaying progress. At one point, they even considered demolishing completed parts of the project and starting over with a new approach. Although architect Utzon made continuous efforts to address the issues, the basket of problems was too large, and the cost of addressing them was too high. Consequently, in 1966, halfway through the project, Utzon was replaced. He secretly left Australia with his family. To avoid the media, they boarded the plane just minutes before the cabin doors closed, never to return. His career was ruined, and nobody dared to approach him for designing large projects again. He never saw the completion of the Sydney Opera House, the creation of his design, until his death in 2008. This is the story of the Sydney Opera House, a tragedy where fast thinking led to slow action. It's truly a poignant opera. Now, let's discuss another story about a large project. This time, the protagonist is the Guggenheim Museum located in northern Spain. This is also a grand architectural achievement, referred to as one of the greatest architectural achievements of the 20th century. Many top architects consider its status to be on par with the Sydney Opera House. However, the story of the Guggenheim Museum is entirely opposite to that of the Sydney Opera House. Not only was it delivered on time and within budget, but the cost was also 3% lower than expected, and the benefits generated exceeded expectations. In other words, it belongs to the rare 0.5%, the perfect projects that escape the iron law of megaprojects. Why could the Guggenheim Museum avoid the iron law of megaprojects? This leads us to its designer, Frank Gehry. His approach to work is entirely different from Utsen's. Before submitting each design drawing, Gehry must go through repeated simulated testing. In the early days, he used various wooden blocks to build models, incorporating many origami elements. He arranged and rearranged these elements, simulating various changes, to find a design solution that was not only aesthetically pleasing but also cost-effective and structurally sound. The Guggenheim Museum's design emerged through this long process of continuous iteration and thoughtful consideration. Later, with the advent of software like CATIA that allows digital simulations, Gehry began using software to try various design shapes, sometimes iterating over 1,000 times. It can be said that each of Gehry's designs already has its miniature, twin, before the final version is formalized. Consequently, his designs often progress rapidly in the construction phase, saving money and time for the builders. This made him a highly sought-after designer, with a long and successful career. The author found in his research that those most successful projects, the 0.5% that escape the iron law of megaprojects, almost all have experiences similar to the Guggenheim Museum. That is, slow thinking, fast action. This is the secret to successful projects. This secret may sound simple and straightforward, but when implementing it in practice, there are many things to pay attention to. Below, we will discuss how to excel in slow thinking and how to excel in fast action separately. Part 3. How to excel in slow thinking, starting with why. Let's talk about how to excel in slow thinking. We'll start with a real story, not about a billion-dollar megaproject this time, but a home project, kitchen renovation. However, for ordinary people, renovating their own kitchen is a major undertaking in daily life, and the advice given in this book is equally applicable. The protagonists of this story are a couple, David and Deborah, living in New York, USA. When they started renovating the kitchen, the budget was $170,000, and they expected it to take 3 months. However, in the end, it took them nearly 2 years and around $800,000. Several times more than the planned budget. What happened? Initially, they just wanted to renovate the kitchen, but later felt the floor was old and ugly and needed replacing. Then, they thought the brick fireplace in the living room didn't match the style of the new kitchen floor, so it had to go. After replacing the fireplace, they realized the makeup room near the fireplace looked out of place. This process expanded step by step until they emptied and rebuilt the entire first floor. But it didn't end there. Their mother suggested since they were already making such significant changes, why not renovate the bathroom on the second floor too? This change triggered another, and in the end, the entire second floor was also renovated. This led to the project's cost and time multiplying several times. So, where did David and Deborah go wrong? Some friends might think of what we mentioned earlier, to think slow, act fast. Did their problem lie in not doing enough slow thinking, not planning properly before starting? Not really. They actually had quite a long thinking phase. They started considering how to renovate the kitchen more than a year in advance, later hiring an experienced architect who spent months finalizing the design drawings before they started. So, their problem wasn't in not thinking slow enough. Then where was it? It was in not clearly defining the purpose of the project, that is, why they were renovating the kitchen. In the process of expanding the renovation, they gradually realized they wanted to better entertain guests by renovating the house. This realization came too late. If they had clarified this purpose from the beginning, they would have understood that just renovating the kitchen wasn't enough, they should have done a comprehensive renovation of the entire house. In that case, the architect would have efficiently planned the overall project based on this requirement. Therefore, to excel in slow thinking, the first thing you need to do is to think clearly about the purpose of your project. This way, your subsequent thinking won't get lost or derailed. For example, when designing a building, you must first consider the most essential function or purpose the building should serve and prioritize this in the design. Like the designer Gary we mentioned earlier, that's how he operates. Every time he meets with potential clients, the first thing he does is have a long conversation to understand why they want to undertake the building project. Starting with why is a principle that applies to almost all projects. Whether you're constructing a skyscraper, organizing a competition, writing a book, creating a product, or renovating your kitchen, you must start with why. Steve Jobs often emphasized a statement: you've got to start with the customer experience and work back toward the technology. You can't start with the technology and try to figure out where you're going to try to sell it. This concept is called working backward and later became widespread in Silicon Valley, becoming a guideline for many companies. I also recall a documentary I once watched called Undercover Billionaire. It featured a billionaire who accepted a challenge to live incognito in a small town with only $100, aiming to earn $1 million in 3 months. What left a deep impression was that whether he was previously running a large business or starting from scratch in the small town scavenging for scrap, he always first identified what the buyer's needs were. Then, based on those needs, he figured out what he needed to do. Part 4. How to excel in slow thinking, continuous iteration and optimization. Alright, in the previous section, we discussed the first key point of slow thinking, which is starting with why. Now, let's move on to the second key point, which is continuous iteration and optimization. The book mentions an example from Pixar, a company specialized in computer-animated films, creating popular movies like Up, Toy Story, Finding Nemo, and Inside Out. The author delved into Pixar's creative process, initially assuming it was akin to the Sydney Opera House model, heavily relying on a genius idea that would drive the project forward once identified. However, later, the author discovered that their creative process followed the Guggenheim Museum model, a continuous cycle of making one version after another through iteration and optimization. Initially, they might only have a very preliminary idea, like a French rat who enjoys cooking, or what happens inside a girl's mind. Then, they would create an outline of about 12 pages, briefly narrating the story. This would expand into a 120-page first draft and then a finalized script. Following that, they would transform the script into a rough version of the movie, incorporating some scenes with dialogue for staff to read. At each step, the Pixar team would undergo scrutiny and feedback from their employees, questioning characters, plotlines, and creativity. The creative team would then take this feedback, research it, and if significant issues were found, they might terminate the project. If improvements were possible, they would make changes, present it again, and after approval, iterate towards a more detailed version, accepting feedback once more. Typically, a Pixar movie goes through this feedback loop 8 times before reaching the final version we see. Why does the author highly endorse this continuous iteration and optimization approach? Fundamentally, it allows for the early identification of potential problems during execution. Another crucial reason is that it helps correct a prevalent cognitive bias in humans, known as the depth of processing illusion. In simple terms, often, we think we understand something, but in reality, we don't. For example, do you know how a bicycle works? Many people think they do. However, if asked to write out the complete principle or draw it on paper, they may suddenly find themselves unsure of where to begin. It's similar to when studying. I may feel I've grasped a theorem, but when asked to use it to explain a real-world phenomenon, I realize there are many details I haven't understood. Therefore, during the slow thinking phase, it's crucial not to stay only at the conceptual level but to engage in practical testing and implementation, at least explaining it thoroughly to someone else. In this process, the depth of processing illusion disappears, revealing where you are correct and where you haven't fully understood. Iterating through each step accomplishes continuous optimization. Part 5. How to excel in fast action, 3 don'ts. Alright, previously, we discussed how to excel in slow thinking. Now, let's talk about how to excel in fast action. From this book, we can extract 3 don'ts. The first one is, don't make the project big, make it small. It means breaking down a large project into many small projects, also known as chunking thinking. We emphasize this thinking in the book Efficiency Brain Science, and it is particularly applicable to complex or information-intensive projects, whether it's a large-scale engineering project or a daunting report you need to write. For example, beyond books, Huawei's 5G base stations use a chunking design. They break down the station into many chunks, such as antenna modules, radio frequency modules, and processing modules, and then assemble and deploy them based on different requirements, resulting in high efficiency. Let's consider a smaller scenario, personal writing. Many well-known authors like to use cards for writing. For instance, Vladimir Nabokov, a famous Russian-American writer of the 20th century, when asked about his writing process, mentioned not writing a novel sequentially from start to finish. Instead, he compared it to a puzzle, having a rough structure in mind where each chunk of content is like a card. When inspired, he writes that particular section and then pieces them together. Similarly, scriptwriters use a similar method with many storyboards, summarizing plot points in just 1 or 2 sentences for an entire story. Adjustments to the plot involve moving or modifying specific boards, avoiding the need to overhaul the entire script, making the process more efficient. So, the first don't is, don't make the project big, make it small, break it into smaller chunks. Now, let's move on to the second don't be a pioneer, be a fast follower. This might sound contradictory to the common belief in advocating for innovation, finding blue oceans, and seizing the first mover advantage. Many people think that for a project to be impressive and profitable, they need to be the first one to come up with the idea. However, data tells us that the most likely to succeed are not the trailblazers but the fast followers. Researchers collected data from 500 brands across 50 product categories and found that the survival rate of pioneers is only half, while fast followers have a survival rate of over 90%, and they also tend to capture a higher market share later. Many perceived innovators are, in fact, fast followers. For example, Apple followed BlackBerry's path in developing smartphones, Alibaba followed eBay, Facebook followed MySpace, and Jobs' Macintosh computer imitated Xerox PARC's achievements. Fast followers are more likely to succeed because, on one hand, they can leverage the experiences and lessons learned by pioneers directly. On the other hand, by being quick, they can seize the benefits of a blue ocean. In emphasizing the success of fast followers, the author offers a piece of advice: always value mature experience. No matter what you are doing, think first if there is mature experience you can leverage. Don't rush to pioneer a new field. But sometimes, for large projects, there might not be any precedents. What to do in such cases? This is where the idea of chunking we discussed earlier comes into play. While the entire project may lack existing experience, breaking it down into chunks might reveal that not everything has been untouched. If there is mature experience available for any particular chunk, make the most of it. It brings to mind the suggestion from the book Small is Beautiful, where, during the entrepreneurial phase, any outsourceable tasks should be outsourced. This is not just for streamlining staff and saving money but, more importantly, it is about leveraging mature experience in each chunk by letting professionals handle professional matters. The book also provides a legendary example of combining chunking and leveraging mature experience: the construction of the Empire State Building in New York. The Empire State Building stands over 400 meters tall with a total of 102 floors. Its appearance is pencil-like, slender, straight, and towering into the sky. It held the title of the world's tallest building for 40 years after completion in 1931. So, how long did it take to build such a tall building? The answer is only 13 months, faster than the time David and Deborah spent renovating their own house. At its fastest, they built 14.5 floors in just 10 days. Moreover, their total cost in the end was 17% less than the budget. How did they achieve this? An important reason is that they weren't actually building a 102-story structure, they were building 102 one-story structures. What does this mean? Every floor was the same, a well-established chunk of experience. This approach also came from another successful experience. The designer of the Empire State Building, Lamb, had previously designed the headquarters of the American Tobacco Company, a building that looked very much like the later Empire State Building. It can be said that the Empire State Building is essentially an enlarged and enhanced version of the American Tobacco Company's building. So, by maximizing the role of mature experience, they undertook minimal risk and completed a groundbreaking megaproject, achieving the world's tallest building, dream that people longed for at the time. We talked about the importance of mature experience during the project. In fact, before starting a project, when estimating time and cost, also look outward and refer to others' experiences. Why does the book specifically emphasize this point? Because humans have a common psychological phenomenon, always thinking, I'm different from others, or this time is different from before. For example, when seeing someone spend a year on a project, when it comes to your turn, you might think, I'm different from them, I won't take that long. Behavioral economics calls this the inside view. However, in reality, you will likely find that your time and cost will most probably fall within the average for such projects. In other words, you are not so different from others. The person who proposed the inside view is Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman. However, he himself fell into this trap. When compiling a textbook, he asked a senior colleague how long such projects generally take, and the colleague said it usually takes at least 7 years. Kahneman was shocked, thinking it would take him at most 2 years. However, in the end, it took him 8 years to complete it. To avoid falling into the trap of the inside view, we need more outside views. In other words, if you want to estimate the time and money a project will consume as accurately as possible, the best way is to find several projects done by others for reference and then take an average. Instead of following your gut feeling. In fact, what we mentioned at the beginning, the iron law of large projects being overtime, over budget, and underperformance, is largely because many projects at the beginning think, I'm different this time, so they underestimate time and cost. This brings us to the last don't we want to share with you today in the fast action section. Don't think you are different from others. In the end, you will find that you are not so different. When reading this book, somehow a sentence often echoed in my mind, the longer I look at history, the more I believe that universal laws determine the trajectory of human development. The distinctive features of each country will only blossom under these universal laws. And when it comes to large-scale projects, it seems to be the same. Every large project, on the surface, appears to be very different. Some are towering buildings that reach the sky, some are railways that span thousands of miles, some are meticulously crafted works, and some are systems that carry massive loads. However, if you put thousands of them together, you will find that the trajectories of those successful projects gradually overlap. They have, over tens of thousands of years and trillions of dollars, forged these reusable patterns for us. If you are about to embark on a complex project of your own, I can't think of any external perspective more worth emphasizing than what this book discusses today. So, I wish you and me both could become the 0.5% of project leaders who can escape the iron law of large projects. I believe it's achievable. After all, the number of people who have read this book is far less than 0.5%. Alright, that's all the content I wanted to introduce to you. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel, like, and share this valuable knowledge with your friends. Let's combine wisdom and practice, achieve our financial goals, and create a better future together. Thank you, everyone, goodbye.